Cooper Lutkenhaus, the 17-year-old 800-meter phenom, just became the youngest world champion ever in athletics history, recently claiming the world indoor title in Poland. And what's most startling is just how confidently he took this victory, especially when you compare it to the scared teenager we saw debut and get knocked out of the heats of the Tokyo World Championships last year. But as amazing as this title was, there are still some issues with Lutkenhaus' performance in Torun that I think need addressing. It was a great performance, no doubt, but not a perfect one as many people are suggesting. Onto the actual race though. There were several challenges to Lutkenhaus' World Championship bid. The first was Elliot Cresson of Belgium, who was the second fastest man indoors this year behind world record holder Josh Hoey. There was also Mohamed Attawi of Spain, who was known to finish like a train in the last 200 meters and had the fastest personal best of the field of 1:42.04. Peter Bol of Australia had also been in good form and won his semi-final looking very comfortable. Lutkenhaus himself had maintained a strong winter build-up after his breakout 2025 season, where he famously ran 1:42.27 at age 16. Possibly the most astounding feat by any teenage distance runner, at the very least in the top two. And during the heats of the indoor championships, he qualified comfortably, even beating Attawi with ease in the semis. So whilst there was some apprehension about how the final would go for Lutkenhaus, it wasn't insane to think that he had a genuine shot of taking the gold. The race began with all the runners assuming their preferred positions. Creston darted to the lead, something the Belgian has a history of doing. His preferred tactic is to stay out of traffic in the pole position and outwork his opponents from the front. Attawi by contrast settled into dead last, which allowed him to conserve energy whilst the others all power off the start line. This usually means he has more gas left in the final 100 meters, whilst everyone else tires after starting off too quickly. But on the flip side, it carries the risk of having to run round the entire field in the final lap, which is especially exacerbated with a shorter indoor track. The Belgian took them through in 24:87. A solid but not blistering first 200 meters. Lutkenhaus slotted into the mid-pack at first, but quickly moved up the field right onto Creston's shoulder. He continued to lead for some time, with Lutkenhaus breathing down his neck, poised on the outer edge of lane 1. The American did not settle in and kept stalking Creston closely until he suddenly accelerated past him with 250 meters to go. Peter Bol tried to make a move of his own, but Creston put in a crucial block that stopped the Aussie's momentum. Lutkenhaus ensured that Creston could not use this move to swing past him and maintained his lead. They hit the last 150 and Lutkenhaus accelerated confidently, whilst the field was strung out in single file. Attawi charged down the back straight but found himself blocked in by Cooper and Creston. They sped into the final 50. Creston moved out to try and pass the teenager, but Lutkenhaus remained firm at the front and took the world indoor title with a 1:44.24 finishing time. This makes Lutkenhaus the youngest ever world champion in track history, and it's put the athletics world into a frenzy. So why did we see such a stark transition from the young American in just 6 months? And is there anything he can improve on in this race? In Tokyo, we saw a version of Cooper who looked like a deer in the headlights. He had just run his historic 1:42 time and was still grappling with the sudden burst of attention he was under. Until a few months ago, he was seen as a mere high school phenom that had several years until he reached the elite level. But after beating many of America's top distance runners in the USA Championships, there was already pressure on him to hang with the very best in the world. His heat in Tokyo was one he was widely expected to qualify for comfortably. He had the fastest season's best of the field and the joint second fastest personal best. What's more, he only needed to place in the top 3 of the heats to advance to the semi-final, so beating a bunch of 1:44 to 1:43 runners seemed pretty doable. Unfortunately, you could see the moment was getting to him on the start line. This resulted in a very poorly run tactical race. Lutkenhaus stuck near the back of the field, similar to what he did in USA's, but instead of settling into the pack and trying to calm his nerves, he stuck on the outside of lane 2 for a majority of the heat. A better move would be to either fully tuck in lane 1 at the back of the pack and move up in the final 300 meters, similar to Attawi, or move up to the front and be more aggressive and at least get yourself a nice offensive position. He clearly was uncomfortable and did not commit to a clear strategy, which forced him to run extra mileage with no real benefit. As a result, he had little left in the home straight and he finished 7th with a 1:47.68 finishing time, 5 seconds slower than his personal best. A frankly terrible race for him, but completely understandable given the circumstances. Lutkenhaus was deeply disappointed with his performance and vowed to avenge his loss by coming back stronger. And he did just that. In the World Indoor Heats, semi-finals, and even before the final, he appeared much more confident in his abilities, and was even carrying a bit of main character energy about him after his wins. So what explains this drastic change in just 6 months? It comes down to the strong coaching of Cooper. If you look at his indoor season, he has been fairly active, but his race schedule was much more calculated than it may first appear. His coach had him competing at meets that are popular enough to have a real crowd and viewership behind them. But notice that his specific races weren't too deep in terms of the competition. In his season opener, he was up against a bunch of 144 to 45 runners, who have historically run 146 to 147 indoors. In his 600 meter in the Millrose Games, he raced a similar caliber of competition. This allowed him to build confidence and get comfortable being in the limelight whilst not being seriously challenged in the actual races. Stacking up convincing, easy, low-stakes wins is a textbook way to build an athlete's confidence. He then had a small step up in competition in the sound running meet, with more experienced indoor runners averaging mid 144 to 145 times, which he passed with flying colours, running an under 20 indoor world record. He then stepped it up again with some low-stakes championship experience at the USA Trials. He could practice both running in heats and racing with an outcome that actually mattered, as this would decide who would go to World Indoors. But since the big three of American 800 meter running were not present, he did not need to worry too much about an early elimination. After he won that, we finally come to World Indoors, where we see again another solid but not monumental step up in competition. He wasn't having to dance with the 141 veterans, but was still competing against the likes of Atawi, Bowler and Creston, who are much stronger than your average 144 runner. Overall, a combination of luck, but especially good planning, allowed Lutkenhaus to develop his mindset over these last few months. And I think this was the single best thing they could have done for him. We have already seen from last season that he has immeasurable talent and ability. The issue was putting it into practice, both tactically and mentally. Giving him the chance to adjust and show that he can still win races in the professional sphere gave him the confidence he needed for the final. And we saw this reflected in our next positive, which is that Cooper ran a solid race plan. There were some problems, mind you, but it was overall a well executed run. The thing he mastered in these championships, which is most important in 800 meter running specifically, is making a decisive move at the right time. Since the 800 is uniquely fast and aggressive, it punishes non-committal moves like no other event, even to those who are experienced. It's often said that you only have one move to make in the 800 meter, so learning how and when to make it is incredibly important. We saw Lutkenhaus do this when he made his big move with 250 to go, and impressively, even after moving up in the last lap, he still conserved his energy to fend off any attacks, despite appearing to have a little more left in the tank. It would be very easy for him to feel a rush of adrenaline at being at the front in the last lap of a championship final, but he still managed to keep his cool and mitigated the risk of rocketing off too hard, allowing his opponents to maybe catch him in the final 50. This shows maturity and composure beyond his age. However, I do think we need to address the fact that there are still some concerning patterns in this competition that will need to be fixed for the outdoor season. Because a consistent weakness of Lutkenhaus is that whilst his second half of the race has become decisive, the same cannot be said for how he runs the first half of his races. He seems to regularly get torn between wanting to be right up at the front, but not always confidently leading. It's actually the same issue he demonstrated in the Tokyo Champs Heat. Even in this indoor final, he was running on the outside line of Creston's shoulder for half the race. It wasn't egregiously wide, but that does make a difference when it's for that long. What's more, in the heats he was running mostly in lane 2 again, and in a lot of his pre-championship meets, he ran large chunks wide on someone's shoulder. But the reason people don't mention it, and the reason I don't think it's been addressed yet, is because the downside of Cooper's confidence building race strategy is that it allows him room to make mistakes that he won't get away with in other races. When he is so much fitter than the rest of the field, positioning and tactics do still matter, but there's only so much an athlete can do to fend you off when you're several seconds faster than them. The Millrose 600 meter is a great example of this, where his opponent forces Cooper to run wide on the bend several times. But in the end, this extra mileage simply didn't matter, because he was levels above the other runners. The thing is, that won't work when you face athletes who are of a similar or better caliber than you physically. And if we're being honest, Cooper was probably the fittest athlete going into this world final. Atawi is the only person that had run marginally faster than him outdoors, but he still did not seem close to that peak shape in this competition. Creston and Bowl are undoubtedly solid contenders, but I would bet on Cooper beating them in a raw time trial right now. Now, it's not like he ran a terrible race by any means, but when he is up against an Arab or a Wanyoni, he is going to underperform with his current tactics. It's a bit like how Sam Ruth was able to hold his own in Boston, but struggled more when he faced stronger competition. So I think we need to be careful about placing too much expectation on Cooper to beat the top dogs, because his tactics simply aren't there yet in my opinion. This final only had 2 of the top 10 fastest outdoor runners from last year. It was a solid field, but there are levels to this game. Nonetheless, Cooper has reportedly been studying his races, which is great to see from an athlete his age, and it only points to him further improving. With some luck, he can come out of 2026 with consistent practice against the top guys, and maybe put in a medal bid for the Beijing Outdoor Championships in 2027. If you want to see a database analysis on how often prodigies live up to the hype, then click on this video here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy training.